The title for my message this morning is Getting Ready to Let Go. And let us pray. Gracious God, bless us now. May your Spirit touch our hearts and minds that we may learn the things and love the things we need to love. In the name of Christ our Lord we pray. Amen. If you're new to this church, we've been following a 12-step series of sermons. The 12 steps were invented, I guess, by the AA organization, Alcoholics Anonymous, but there's many different groups now that use the 12-step program. And if you look into it carefully, you realize you don't have to be addicted to anything in order to enormously improve your life by going through this program. And so we're going through it, and today we're on step 6 and 7. Step 6 is I am entirely ready to have God remove all my defects of character. And step 7 is humbly ask God to remove all my shortcomings. Now I want to begin by going back in time to a famous date in history. And that date is October the 31st, 1517. And on that day, a young Augustinian monk by the name of Martin Luther walked down a street in Wittenberg, Germany, with a hammer, a few nails, and a piece of parchment. On the parchment was a list of 95 grievances he had with the church. Very few bystanders, if any, took any notice as he nailed it to the church door. For one thing, it was in Latin, a language that only the clergy and academia understood. And secondly, what he did was actually quite a normal way to engage in debate. Luther at the time was a professor at the University of Wittenberg, and what he simply wanted to do was to discuss the points on his list with other learned individuals. But as sometimes happens, things did not go precisely as intended. Luther got a far, far wider audience than he ever thought he would. And the reason is that a generation earlier, in 1439, another very famous man, Johannes Gutenberg, had developed something that is called the movable type printing press. And not until our own day has there been such a seismic shift in communication. Experts today are saying that the internet, combined with pocket computers, is the second such seismic shift in communication since the time of Gutenberg. What happened in his time, Gutenberg's time, is that he made possible, for the very first time in history, mass production and distribution of ideas and information. Books that were now quite affordable could be produced within hours and shipped anywhere in Europe. Before Gutenberg's time, it had taken months, and I mean many months, to produce even a tiny number of very expensive copies of a manuscript. Now, what happened in the case of Martin Luther was that somebody else, not Luther, it wasn't Luther himself, but somebody else got a hold of his manuscript and had it printed. And within a month, it was being read all over Europe. And so actually, it was quite by accident that the Protestant Reformation began. At its heart, the divide between Catholics and Protestants was not about corruption, although if you read the 95 Theses, an awful lot of them are about corruption. Then there was plenty of corruption in the church at the time. And that was something that grieved not just Luther, but a lot of other clergy and academics in those years. The word Catholic means universal. One universal church under Rome, which is what we'd had up to that point, and is what the hierarchy wanted to continue with. The word Protestant is the Latin for protester. So what you had in the 16th century was a group of protesters who were upset with an established institution, and so they were protesting. Does that sound a little bit modern to you? What was at the heart of the dispute? Well, Luther had discovered, actually he had rediscovered, the importance of grace as a gift of God that is freely given. What is grace? Grace is love that you do not expect and that you do not deserve, but still it comes to you. And that's something that every last one of us has received at times and places. Somebody has done something for us that we didn't expect, didn't deserve, and it's a very humbling experience when that happens. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul teaches about the grace of God in Christ, especially in the letter to the Romans. For Martin Luther, rediscovering this passage in the book of Romans gave him just the most tremendous sense of freedom and peace. You see, the man was in agony. He was deeply burdened with the idea that he could never be worthy of the love of God. And before you say, well, that's ridiculous, my experience has been that all of us struggle with this. There's none of us here that don't struggle with the idea of whether or not we're really worthy. Because deep down, I have a hunch we're not. That's the way Luther was. Deep down, he was absolutely in agony with the idea that he could never, ever be worthy of God's love. And he tried. I mean, he tried. And it was while he was reading Paul's letter to the Romans in the New Testament that it suddenly hit him. It just overwhelmed him. And he accepted for the first time in his heart that he didn't have to struggle, that he didn't have to sacrifice, that he didn't have to flog himself and beat himself up for the approval of God that in fact was already there. All he had to do was accept it in his heart. And that just took the most enormous load of guilt off his back. And finally, Luther discovered that maybe God actually did love him. He didn't have to prove anything. Now, for Luther and the Protestant movement that followed, this became the absolute central doctrine. On the other side of the debate was Pope Leo X. Pope Leo was Luther's great adversary. There's Leo, not a very handsome guy. Leo emphasized the importance of working out our salvation with fear and trembling, just as it says in Philippians 2:12. Also, the words of St. Paul in the Bible. So what on earth does this all have to do with the 12-step program? Just this. Step 6 contains a paradox. On the one hand, it asks us to face dead on, to acknowledge and deal with our issues, our faults, our excuses, and our roadblocks. And then goes on to say, but only God can remove them. First you have to do this, and then God does that. Richard Rohr says it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Which comes first? Grace or responsibility? Now he goes on to quote an old aphorism, and I have to admit I had never heard it before, but I rather like it. And it goes this way. No one catches the wild ass by running after him, yet only those who run after the wild ass ever catch him. Am I the only one who had never heard that before? How many of you had heard that before? Okay, you make me feel better. Nobody put your hand up. I rather like it. It's rather good. Richard Rohr says that if both Luther and Pope Leo had meditated on that old adage, we might have avoided the intense bitterness and the bloodshed of the 100 years that followed the Reformation. You see, the paradox is that they're both right. They're both right. Sadly, at the time, they not only misunderstood each other, they totally refused to hear what the other was trying to say. Almost all church historians agree with this today. They became locked into an all-or-nothing mentality. It's my way or it's the highway. And the huge difficulty is this: when religious faith gets stuck in a totally rationalist, Rohr calls it a dualistic mindset, it becomes problematic and even dangerous. A dualistic mindset is when people decide it's got to be this or it's got to be that. It's either black or it's white. It's right or it's wrong. No shades of gray. No compromise. And when you're there, anyone who disagrees with you, at best is wrong and stupid, and at worst is an enemy who has to be stopped. And this is where ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are. They're locked into this dualistic mindset. It's my way or the highway. I'm right, everybody else is wrong. It's not just them. There's a ton of right-wing Christians, some left-wing too, I might add, who are in the very same place. I'm right, everyone else is wrong. There are right-wing Hindus in India in the very same place. And religious faith that has that kind of mindset, at best is very unhealthy, and at worst is dangerous. And it's no wonder that there are atheists, a number of them, who are now making the claim very forcefully that religion is a huge problem. Religion is the biggest problem. I think when you get locked into that mindset, we do become part of the problem. The point is this: the part of our freedom in Christ that comes from grace and the part that is our own responsibility cannot be separated. They both rely on each other. And that's why we call it a paradox. It's not the only one we have in Christianity. Our faith is full of them. The Trinity is the biggest. How can God be three in one? Doesn't make any sense. He's either one or he's three. And I've been a number of times at conferences where non-Christians, some of them were Jewish, some were Muslim, and some were secular humanists, all ridiculed, just absolutely skewered the idea that Christians talk about God as three in one. They just thought it was stupid. And yet long ago, as early as the 1st century, Christians decided that they knew God as creator. We still do. Whenever you look up at the universe, you know the creation of God. And yet, we saw God in a totally unique way in Jesus. There was something so special and unique about him that when we looked at the face of Christ, we were looking at the face of God. And at the same time, when we sense God's Spirit here in our hearts, here in this church, it is nothing less than the power of God that you're feeling in your heart. And so we know God in these three amazingly different ways. It's a paradox. G.K. Chesterton described a paradox as truth standing on its head in order to get your attention. I rather like that. Truth standing on its head to get your attention. The paradox in steps 6 and 7 is that we must fully own, admit our defects of character. As I said last week, make a list of them. But then, in effect, step back and do nothing until God takes them away. It's rather like they used to say in the army, hurry up and wait. They used to say that, didn't they, Bob? Yes, he's nodding his head. Hurry up and wait. Probably they're still saying it. The gift of love that God gives us is pure and free, but to achieve it, to gain it, we need to understand. We need to stand under it. That's what it is to understand, to stand under something. And giving up control, paradoxically, leads to far greater control. I was reading about Ansel Adams, who lived in the first half of the last century. He was an amazing photographer. And his pictures, especially of Yosemite Park, are still the most widely used in books and calendars everywhere. Now, apparently, Adams used to wait for hours and even days for the perfect light before taking a picture. And his famous comment was, "Chance favors the prepared mind." And what this means for us today is that waiting to let go could be the work of weeks, months, and even years. So many times I have talked to people who have told me that until they were ready, God could never have changed them. I've heard people say to me, "I wasn't ready back then. I wasn't ready then." But when I was, and the Spirit came and started to move through me, it allowed me to become the person I am today, not the person that I used to be. Getting ready is the task of working things out in fear and trembling, which is what Pope Leo said. Letting go is allowing God to come and make the changes. We need both. We cannot change ourselves. Only God can change us. But God needs us to be prepared and ready and open. I think most often we can't do this alone. I think we need help. Last week I said, you got to share your list with somebody. And it kind of reminds me of this cute story I read about a woman who went to New York City, took the elevator up to the 23rd floor of a very exclusive apartment building, and knocked on the door. A beautiful receptionist in a full sari invited her in. And as she walked through the door, incense wafted out into the hall and all around, and Indian music was playing. And the beautiful receptionist, because she was gorgeous, whispered to the woman, "You are here to see the great guru who knows all, sees all, and understands all." The woman hesitated for a moment and then said, "Just go and tell Sheldon that his mother is here." You see, at times, we need a mother who can say to us, "Who are you kidding? Who do you think you are? You're Sheldon." I want to close this talk with an old Persian parable. It's a great parable. Once upon a time, there lived a wealthy monarch who had 4 wives. He loved his 4th wife the most. He gave her the finest robes. He treated her to the best of delicacies, nothing but the best. He also loved his 3rd wife. He would show her off to neighboring kings when they came to visit. She was very attractive. He was deeply fond of wife number 2. She wasn't all that attractive, but she was his confidant. She was very thoughtful and patient. And whenever the king faced a problem, he would confide in her. And she was always able to help him through a number of difficult times. Now, the king's 1st wife had always been a loyal partner and had made great contributions in maintaining his kingdom. But the simple truth was, he did not love his 1st wife. Although she loved him, he neglected her, and he hardly took any notice of her. The years passed by. The king grew older, and the day came when he fell very gravely ill. The best physicians in the land were called in, and they examined him, and they gave him all the medicine they could find. But the truth was, there was nothing they could do. And they told him that his time was short. Deeply troubled at the thought of dying alone, he called in his 4 wives. And to his 4th wife, he said, "You know that I have loved you the very best. I have showered you with the finest clothing and goods that money can buy. Now that I'm dying, will you follow me and keep me company?" "What?" wife number 4 replied. "You got to be kidding. No way." And she turned and walked out. Well, he was devastated by her attitude. The king turned to his 3rd wife and said, I've also loved you all my life. Now that I'm dying, will you follow me and keep me company?" "No," replied 3rd wife, "I think not. Life is too good. When you die, I'm going to find someone else." The king was stunned. He turned to his 2nd wife and said, "I've always looked to you for advice, and you've always been there for me. When I die, will you follow me and keep me company?" "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," she said. "This time I cannot help you. The most that I will ever be able to do is walk with you to your grave." It was then that a sadder and wiser king heard a voice say, "I'll go with you. I'll follow you wherever you go." And the king looked up, and there was his 1st wife. She was thin and emaciated from neglect. "My goodness," said the king, "I should have taken better care of you when I had the chance." So what's the point of this very strange parable? The ancient Persians would have explained it this way. In life, we all have 4 partners, 4 spouses, if you like. Our 4th spouse is our body. And no matter how much time and effort we lavish on trying to make our bod look good, and let's face it, we all do, it will leave us when we die. Our 3rd spouse is our possessions, our status, and our wealth. And when we die, it will all go to others. Our 2nd is our family and our friends. No matter how much they've been there for us, the furthest they can ever walk with us is to our grave. So who's our 1st spouse? It's our soul within us. If you're scientifically minded, you might want to call it your DNA. I'm talking about the unique you. Different and unique from absolutely everyone else. Different even from the physical body you inhabit. Now think about that. There's something about you that transcends the years. You look in the mirror and you wonder who this old person is because you don't feel any different than you felt 40 or 50 years ago. That's the part of you I'm talking about. Traditionally, Christians have referred to it as your soul. And very often, we neglect our soul. We neglect our authentic self in pursuit of wealth, of career, of power, of pleasure, cruises, I don't care, you name it. But the simple truth is, your soul is the only thing that's going to follow you wherever you go. So cultivate, strengthen, and cherish your soul. For that's the one part of you that will continue throughout eternity. That's going to follow you to the throne of God. And that is what your faith is all about. And that is why you're here at the deepest level, to care for your soul, the most authentic part of you. And when you do that, only then can you really care for others. Zechariah 4:6 says, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. You will succeed because of my Spirit." Only God has the power to heal and make us whole. And He will. And He will. He will. Amen. Let us pray.